The cloak was old. I had chosen it deliberately. Rough wool, the hem repaired twice with mismatched thread, the kind of garment that says nothing about the man inside it, except that he has been cold before and learned to deal with the cold. I had left my horse at the border way station, under the care of a man who knew how to be silent, and I had walked the last 8 miles into the storm on foot. I had done this before, twice before to be exact. The first time, 2 winters past, I had stopped at a village in the Millhaven lowlands, a prosperous place, 3 grain stores, a pack hall with a painted door. The good wife at the largest house had looked at my mended cloak and told me to try the way station 3 miles back. I had slept in a hay byre and left before dawn. That was useful information. I did not want good wives who kept the door only for the well-dressed. The second time, in a river settlement called Brackford, a merchant had taken me in quickly, too quickly, with too many questions about where I had come from. He had noticed the quality of the boots beneath the cloak. My boots are always good. They are the one vanity I cannot entirely suppress. He had offered me his best room and his daughter's hand in the same evening, both before he had known my name. I had thanked him for the room and left at first light, and I had worn worse boots since. What I was looking for, I could not have named precisely. Something I had stopped being able to find in the throne room of Thornmere, where everyone who approached me did so with a calculation behind their eyes, however warm their smile. I had governed my pack for 11 years. I was a fair ruler, a strong alpha, and I was, if I am honest, profoundly lonely, in a way that the running of a kingdom cannot touch. My wolf had been quiet for years, not sick, not absent, but quiet, the way a fire goes when there is nothing left to burn. I wanted to know if there was a door, somewhere in this kingdom I ruled, that would open for a cold stranger, with a mended cloak, and nothing to offer. Fernholt was a small settlement at the edge of the northern timber country, near the border reach of Thornmere, where the pack roads thinned, and the snow fell earlier and harder than anywhere else in my lands. I had chosen it because nothing about it invited ambition. There was no trade road through it, no hall of standing, no posting station. The pack registry listed it as a border settlement of 18 households, mostly timber families and 1 or 2 small healers' holdings. It had no ranking in the pack hierarchy. It was, in the language of the court, nowhere. I arrived as the light was failing. My hand, which I had cut 2 days before on a split fence post, was wrapped in cloth that had soaked through, and I was colder than I had expected. The storm had come in faster from the north than the weather readers had predicted, which is something they do with reliable frequency, and which I have learned to account for by always leaving earlier than they suggest. The first house had no light in the window. The second had light but no answer at the door. I could hear voices go quiet when I knocked, which told me what I needed to know. The third house, set a little back from the road on a rise, had a light and a small wisp of smoke, and the door was answered before I had finished knocking. She opened it with a basin in one arm and a small cloth in the other, the way someone does when they have been in the middle of something and chose to come to the door anyway. She was perhaps 28 or 30, dark-haired, with her hair pinned back in a practical way and the look of someone who had been working since before the light. She wore a plain wool dress the color of undyed linen, an apron with a smear of something herbal on it, and a worn cloth wrap around her left wrist that I noted without understanding. She looked at me. Not at my cloak, not at my hands, not at the obvious fact that I was cold and had been walking in a storm. She looked at my face, the way you look at a person when you are deciding something about the inside of them rather than the outside. Then she stepped back and held the door open. "Come in," she said. "There's a stool near the fire." That was all. No questions, no conditions, no inventory of what I might offer in return. "Come in. There is a stool near the fire." I went in. Her name was Marin. She told me this 15 minutes later, when she had set the basin down, offered me a cup of something warm from a pot on the hearth. Not tea, something thicker, root-based, with a faint sweetness, and sat across the small kitchen table without any of the performance of hospitality. She told me her name the way you tell a stranger your name, when you think they are simply a person and not a problem. I told her mine was Aldrich, which is true. It is my name. I told her I was a trapper working the northern timber routes and had misjudged the storm, which is not true. But I had found over time that people in border settlements accepted trapper without much follow-up, and I did not want to be a wandering merchant, because merchants always prompt questions about goods. She said, "Trappers don't usually come through Fernholt. There's better timber country east." I said I had heard that and had been making my way east when the storm came in. She accepted this with a nod that told me she did not entirely believe it and had decided it did not matter. There is a kind of people who extend grace not because they are naive, but because they have made a choice to default toward trust rather than suspicion, and they know the difference between those two things. She was that kind of person, and it was apparent to me within the first 10 minutes. "Your hand," she said, without preamble, nodding toward the soaked cloth wrapping. I had forgotten about it. I told her it was nothing, a fence cut, 2 days old. She got up, fetched a small clay box from the shelf beside the hearth, and came back to the table. "Let me look at it." It was not a question, not a command either, exactly. It was the tone of someone who knows what they are doing in their own domain and sees no reason to make a performance of it. I unwrapped the hand. The cut was not deep, but it had not been properly cleaned, and she looked at it with a small, focused attention, and then cleaned it with something that stung precisely, and bandaged it with the efficiency of someone who has done this many times for many different kinds of injuries. While she worked, she asked me nothing personal. She asked whether I had eaten, whether the wound had gone hot at any point, whether I had cleaned it at all since it happened. Practical questions with useful answers. When I said I had not eaten since morning, she got up without comment and began making something on the hearth. She did not ask whether I could pay. She did not establish what I had to offer first. I watched her move around that small kitchen, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time, which was the sensation of being seen as simply a person. Not an alpha, not a king, not a problem to manage or an opportunity to cultivate. A cold man with a cut hand who had misjudged the storm, who needed a stool near the fire and something warm to eat. My wolf, which had been still for longer than I could account for, moved. Not loudly. Not with the surge and the push I had felt in early battles, the animal rising to protect the body in a crisis. This was quieter. A slow, deliberate turn, the way a sleeping creature wakes and lifts its head when it has caught a scent it recognizes from a long time ago. Not alarm, recognition. I told myself it was the cold and the warmth of the fire, and the fact that I had not eaten. Wolves respond to comfort and its absence. There was nothing more to it than that. She set a bowl in front of me. Barley, salt pork, some kind of dried herb, simple food, the kind made from what was in the stores at the end of a long winter, and I ate it, and it was the best meal I had eaten in recent memory, which I recognized was a significant statement, and one I did not fully understand at the time. "Is there somewhere I can offer payment for lodging?" I asked, when the bowl was empty. "If you have a room, or if you would allow me to use the stable, I am glad to work for it in the morning." She considered this with a small tilt of her head, the way she appeared to consider most things. Not quickly and not slowly, but with a particular quality of attention that suggested she was actually thinking it through, rather than reaching for the nearest polite refusal or acceptance. "There's a room," she said. "My husband's cousin stayed there last autumn. The bed is made up. You can take it." I am grateful. "The storm will be through by morning," she said, "but it will leave a foot of snow on the road east, so you might as well stay until the road is passable." She said this practically, not generously, which is to say she said it as a statement of practical fact rather than as an invitation for gratitude. I thanked her anyway. She nodded once and went back to her work. I stayed for 3 days. The storm, as she had predicted, cleared by morning, but it left the road in exactly the condition she had described, and she mentioned this once, and I said I was happy to work for my keep in the meantime, and she gave me a list of things that needed doing around the holding, as though this were an entirely ordinary arrangement, which she appeared to have decided it was. I split wood. I repaired a fence section at the north side of the yard that had lost 2 rails to the weight of the snow. I carried water from the well. I was not practiced at these things, the wood splitting especially, and she did not comment on this, though I could see her register it, and I could see the moment she decided it also did not matter. On the first full day, I watched her work. She was a healer, not pack-sponsored, not registered with the hall, which meant she worked outside any official ranking, taking what people brought her, and sometimes going to them. A young woman from 3 houses down came in the morning, with a child who had a bad chest. Marin listened to the child breathe, made a preparation of something from dried herbs hung along the kitchen ceiling, wrapped the child's chest in a way she explained carefully to the young mother, and sent them home with a small cloth packet of the herbs for steam boiling. She took nothing for it except a small jar of last summer's pickles, which the young mother had brought as though this were the understood fee, and which Marin accepted without any fuss. An older man came in the afternoon with his arm wrapped in cloth that had gone through a field accident. She unwrapped it, examined it with the same focused attention she had given my hand, and told him he had been lucky, and that the bone was not broken, only bruised, and that he needed to rest it for 2 weeks, which he said he could not afford to do, and she said, "I know," and wrapped it in a way designed to make it functional, rather than healed, which she explained to him was the wrong way to treat it, but the practical way given the situation. He paid her nothing. She did not appear to expect him to. In the evening, she sat at the table with a small clay lamp and worked on what appeared to be a record, a handwritten list of plants, preparations, treatments, kept in a plain-bound book with a careful hand. She did not seem to notice me noticing this. She worked quietly and thoroughly, and when she was done, she put the book away and banked the fire and went to bed without ceremony. I lay in the small room that smelled of cedar and old wool and listened to the house settle in the cold, and my wolf was not still. On the second day I said, carefully, "You were married?" She looked up from the pot she was stirring. "Yes. I'm sorry for your loss." She was quiet for a moment. "He was a good man," she said. "He died 3 years ago. A logging accident." She stirred the pot twice more. "His pack, the Ironfell pack, to the east. They released me from affiliation after the funeral. Pack protocol when there are no children. I've been unaffiliated since." She said this plainly, without bitterness. The way you describe a piece of geography, here is the mountain, here is the valley, here is the border where one territory ends and another begins. But I heard what she did not say, which is that pack affiliation is not a small thing to lose, and that the Ironfell pack's decision to release her had been, by any measure, a cruelty dressed as protocol, and that she had absorbed this without collapsing, and had built a life in its absence. The cloth wrap on her left wrist, I understood now, covered the place where the affiliation mark had been, the small branded sigil that packs use to mark membership, which fades slowly when affiliation is removed. It was not, I had thought when I first noticed it, a healer's bandage. It was more like a habit, a covering of something she did not need to explain to people, but preferred not to display. "The Ironfell pack," I said, "has a reputation for protocol over generosity." She glanced at me with a small, dry quality that was not quite humor, but was close to it. "You've heard of it then, for a trapper from the timber routes." I said I got around. She let it pass. That was the second or third time she had let something pass that she had clearly noticed, and I was beginning to understand that this was a choice she made deliberately, to give the space for someone to be something other than what they appeared, without making it a production. That evening she asked me, without looking up from the record book, whether I had pack affiliation of my own. It was the only personal question she had directed at me in 2 days, and it was asked in the same practical tone as the questions about my hand wound. Not from particular curiosity, I thought, but because it was relevant information for a healer to have about someone in her home. "I do," I said. "A good pack?" I considered this question with more honesty than she could have anticipated. "I believe so," I said. "I try to make it one." She nodded, as though this were a satisfactory answer. "The Ironfell pack was a good pack once," she said, not accusingly, just as a fact. "My husband thought so. He was loyal to them his whole life. He would have been sorry about how they handled it afterward." She turned a page in the record book. "I decided not to be sorry on his behalf. He was generous, and I thought the more useful way to honor that was to stay generous myself." I looked at her in the lamplight. This woman who had been released from her pack by protocol, who had lost her husband at the logging camps, who ran an unaffiliated healer's practice out of a border holding with a roof that needed replacing before next winter. And I felt something in my chest that had nothing to do with the bond, and everything to do with simple admiration. The kind that comes when you see someone choosing to be a particular kind of person in the face of every reasonable excuse not to. That seems, I said carefully, like a difficult choice to keep making. Most of the right choices are, she said, and turned another page, and the conversation ended there, in the quiet way her conversations tended to end, not closed, just complete. On the third morning, I woke before the fire had been rebuilt, and I lay in the dim room, and I knew. It is difficult to explain the knowing to someone who has not experienced it. The mate bond, the true fated bond, not the pack-registered affiliation bonds that can be arranged and released, is something my pack scholars describe as a deep recognition, older than thought. For most wolves, it announces itself with the mate mark, a burning on the inside of the wrist, over the pulse, that corresponds to the same burning in the one you are bonded to. It is not a slow feeling. It is a simultaneous recognition, like two halves of the same seal pressed together. I had been told my mark was dormant. Every healer and scholar I had consulted in 11 years of kingship had said the same thing, that some alpha kings were bonded to no one, that the fated bond was not guaranteed, that I might simply be one for whom it was not fated. I had accepted this the way you accept a weather prediction that has proven reliable so many times you have stopped arguing with it. The burning on my wrist woke me. Not painful, not the wound in my hand, which was nearly healed. The other wrist, the inner pulse point on the left, was warm with a light I could feel before I could see, and when I held my arm up in the gray early morning light from the one small window, the mark was there, not the pale dormant shadow I had looked at for years, lit. A spiral of pale silver gold at my wrist, the mark that had sat quiet on my skin since birth, now burning the way a coal burns when air finally reaches it. I sat with this for a long time. She was the first person who had opened a door for me without knowing who I was. She was the first person, in longer than I could accurately account for, who had treated me simply as a cold man in need of a stool near a fire. She had cleaned my hand and fed me from her stores, and given me a room, and put me to work without asking for anything, except that I not be a problem. In 3 days, she had shown me more of what I had been looking for, whatever it was I had been looking for, riding out from Thornmere on a cold pretense, than 2 years of searching had found. And she did not know who I was. I got up. I rebuilt the fire in the kitchen before she came down, which I could manage without embarrassment at this point. I made the root tea from the pot she had shown me, which was a more complex preparation than it looked, and which she had demonstrated, without being asked, when she had noticed me watching it the first morning. I set 2 cups on the table, and I sat, and I waited. She came down when the light had grown enough to see by. She looked at the fire and the cups with a quality of attention I had come to recognize. The small pause that was her version of being moved, without being performative about it. She sat across the table and wrapped her hands around the cup. "The road east will be passable today," she said. "Yes." She looked at me over the rim of the cup. She had very steady eyes, dark, patient, the kind that had seen things and absorbed them without becoming hard. "You're not a trapper," she said. It was not a question. I had known it was coming. She had known for at least 2 days. "No," I said. "Are you in trouble?" "No." She waited. I had rehearsed nothing, which was unusual for me. In 11 years of kingship, I had rarely been without words that had been considered in advance. I found that I had no prepared speech. I had only the truth, which felt both insufficient and the only thing available. "I came to find out," I said, "whether there was a door in this kingdom that would open for someone who had nothing to recommend him, except that he was cold." She was quiet for a moment. She turned the cup in her hands. "That's a strange thing to go looking for," she said. "Yes. Did you find it?" "I found it the first night." She looked at her cup. Then she looked at me. "Who are you?" I reached into the inner pocket of the traveling cloak, which was draped over the back of the chair, and I took out the single thing I had brought from Thornmere that could not be left behind. Not a crown. I do not travel with a crown. A small seal, the size of a coin, on a chain. The Thornmere pack seal, the spiral mark pressed in old silver, the one that appears on every treaty and pack document in this territory, and which any wolf with pack literacy in the northern reaches would recognize on sight. I set it on the table between us. She looked at it for a long time without touching it. Then she looked at me, and her expression was not what I had expected. I do not know what I had expected. Shock, perhaps. The sudden recalibration that people do when they realize the calculation has been wrong. Some version of the performance that comes when someone understands they are in the presence of power and adjusts accordingly. She looked at me the same way she had been looking at me for 3 days, which is to say with the same patient steadiness, and what I saw move through her expression was not performance, but something real and unguarded. A complicated thing, not simple at all.
Aldrich of Thornmere, she said.
Not a question. Naming it, to make it real. Yes. She was quiet for what felt like a long time, and then she said, I fed you barley and salt pork. Something in that sentence, said in exactly the dry, unsurprised tone she used for most things, undid me rather completely. It was, I said, the best meal I have had in a long time. I mean that without any exaggeration. She looked at the seal. She did not reach for it. Why are you telling me now? Because I am leaving today, and I cannot leave without telling you. Why not? I turned my left wrist over on the table. The mark was still lit, dimmer in the morning kitchen light than it had been in the dark of the room, but visible, the spiral burning soft and certain at the pulse point. She looked at it. Then, slowly, she unwrapped the cloth from her left wrist. The faded pack affiliation mark from the Ironfell release was there, as I had thought, but beneath it, or rather, over it, covering it in the way that a river covers old stone, her own pulse point was burning with the same light. Not the Ironfell mark, the mate mark, silver gold, the same spiral, lit with the same impossible warmth. She stared at it. She had clearly not looked at her wrist in some time. The cloth wrapping had been habit, not concealment of something she had been watching. She had not known it was there. I don't understand, she said. The fated bond, I said. The true mate mark. It presents when the fated pair are in proximity long enough for the bond to recognize itself. I believe it was lit before I was. I believe it recognized you before I understood what I was feeling. She was very still. She turned her wrist slowly in the morning light, watching the mark the way you watch something that belongs to the world of story or inheritance, rather than the world of this kitchen and this cup. I have been told, she said quietly, that I was nothing much to offer. She said this not bitterly, but with the flatness of someone reporting something they have heard so many times it has become rote. The Ironfell Pack's assessment. Her late husband's family's accounting, delivered at a funeral and formalized in a release document. The mark disagrees with that assessment, I said. As do I. She looked at me. You don't know me, she said. You knew me for 3 days while pretending to be someone else. I was not pretending to be someone else, I said. I was Aldrich, the same man sitting at this table who split your fence rails with no skill and ate your salt pork and had his hand cleaned by you. The crown changes very little about the man. In some ways it clarifies him, and what I found here, what 3 days in this kitchen clarified for me, is something I cannot unknow. She turned the cup in her hands again. It was a habit of hers, this small turning motion, which I had come to understand as the outward sign of thinking. I'm an unaffiliated healer in a border settlement, she said. I have a holding that needs a new roof before next winter, and a kitchen garden, and 18 active patients, and no pack name. Yes, you're the Alpha King of Thornmere. Yes. Those are very different things. They are, I said. I am not asking you to resolve the difference this morning. I am telling you that the mark is real, and that I am asking, not arranging, not commanding, whether you would allow me to return. To know you properly, as the man I am, not as the man in the mended cloak, whether you would let this be a choice that you make with open eyes. She looked at me for a long time. I need to think, she said. Of course. And I need you to go, because I cannot think with you sitting in my kitchen. I almost smiled. I did not, because it seemed important not to make her feel managed. I will go, I said. I will leave you the seal. Not as a credential, but because you should be able to show it to someone, if you need to verify that I am who I say I am. If you wish to reach me, the border way station at Crestholm is staffed by a man named Orvin, who is discreet, and who knows how to send a message to me without announcement. I stood. I took the traveling cloak from the chair. I left the seal on the table. At the door, I stopped, because there was one more thing and it could not wait for a later time. The Ironfell pack, I said, without turning around, was wrong about what you have to offer. Their protocol is their business. Their opinion of your worth is not a truth about you. I want you to know that I am aware of the difference, and that nothing about how you were treated by them will be allowed to stand unchallenged in my jurisdiction. She said nothing, but I heard the small, involuntary sound she made, not grief, not relief, something older and more complicated than either, and I carried it with me, out the door, and down the snow-packed road, and all the 8 miles back to the way station, and it sat in my chest like the ember of something that had been cold for a very long time, and had just been given air. She sent the message 3 weeks later. Not yes or no, not yet. A question, sent through Orvin in the careful handwriting I had watched her use in the record book. If I came to Thornmere, what would I be coming to? I wrote back, yourself, and whatever you decide to build from there. Nothing is required of you, except what you choose. She came at the end of the 4th week, in a cart driven by Orvin, who had apparently decided on his own initiative to go and collect her, and who reported to me only that she had not packed much, which I understood as a useful piece of information about her state of mind. He also reported that she had brought her healer's record book and a supply of dried herbs wrapped in cloth, which I understood as useful information of a different kind. She had not packed for a visit. She had packed for a life. She arrived at the back gate of Thornmere Hold, which was the gate I had specified in the message, not the front, not the ceremonial road, not the approach that announces arrival to the whole court at once. The back gate was where the kitchens received their provisions, and where the wolves who worked the perimeter came and went. It was, I had always thought, the more honest entrance. I met her there myself. She looked at the stone walls and the frost-covered parapets, and the sheer scale of a pack holding that governed 37 settlements, and she was very quiet for a moment. Then she looked at me, the same way she had looked at me across the kitchen table, as though the surroundings had nothing to do with what she was actually assessing. You look different with clean boots, she said. I told you they were a vanity. You didn't tell me any such thing. I thought it. The small quality around her eyes that I had come to understand was her version of a smile, appeared for a moment, and then she looked back at the gate. All right, she said. Show me. I showed her Thornmere over the course of 3 days. Not the ceremonial halls and the council chambers first, but the wolf runs and the healer's ward and the kitchen gardens, still bare under frost, and the pack library where the records were kept, and the small infirmary that was understaffed and had been since before my reign. She had questions about all of it, practical, specific questions, the kind asked by someone who is thinking about what could be built, not about what already existed. On the first day she spent 40 minutes in the infirmary without me, talking to the 2 healers on duty, and when she came out she had the same expression she had worn when she unwrapped the older man's arm in Fernholt, the look of someone who has assessed a situation accurately and is already, internally, beginning to address it. She did not say anything to me about the infirmary that day. She waited until the evening, and then told me, over supper in the small room off the kitchen, that I had directed the staff to set for us, rather than the formal dining hall, exactly what the infirmary needed, and in what order, and why. She had taken notes in the record book she carried. I listened to her without interrupting. When she was finished, I said, "Tell me which of those things require my authority and which you can do yourself." She looked at me for a moment, and I could see her adjusting some expectation she had held. I did not know what she had expected me to say, but it had not been that. "Most of it I can do myself," she said, "if I have the run of the herb stores and the authority to hire. You have both." She looked down at her notes. "The roof of the east wing also needs attention before the next hard frost. I'll have it seen to." I didn't ask. I know you didn't. You were going to wait until it was a more pressing problem and bring it up in a practical context rather than as a personal request. I looked at her steadily. I have been paying attention. She looked at me then, with something unguarded in her expression, something that was not yet what it would become between us, but was the beginning of it. The recognition that the man across the table had, in fact, been watching with the same quality of attention she had been watching with. and that this was not a performance of perceptiveness, but the real thing. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you." On the third day, the council received her formally, which could not be put off without causing more disruption than it was worth. I had told them only what was necessary, that I had found my fated mate, that the mark had been witnessed, that she would be coming to Thornmere. The council, 5 senior wolves, all of them careful men who dealt in outcomes, had received this information with the particular silence of people recalculating quickly. Maren sat across the council table in the dress she had brought from Fernholt, which was a better dress than the kitchen apron, but still plainly the best dress of an unaffiliated healer from a border settlement. And she listened to the council's questions without expression. They were not discourteous, they knew better, with me present, but their questions about her background, her affiliation, her standing, were the questions of men who had a system to protect, and she heard them clearly. When they were done, she said, "My left wrist bears the fated mate mark of your Alpha King, and his left wrist bears mine. If that is not sufficient standing for your purposes, I don't know what standing means." The room was very quiet. I looked at her. She was looking at the council, not at me, with the patient steadiness that was entirely her own, and I understood in that moment, with a clarity I had not anticipated, that she was going to be a remarkable Luna, not because she was awed by power, but because she was not. 2 of the 5 council members inclined their heads. The other 3 followed, because in Thornmere, the council inclines their heads to the Alpha King's judgment, and my judgment was sitting across the table with her hands folded and her wrist turned slightly upward, so the mark was visible. The Ironfell pack sent an envoy 6 weeks later. I had been expecting it. They had heard, as things heard across pack territories, and they wanted to establish that their release of Maren had been a proper protocol decision and not a disavowal of her worth, which is an interesting distinction to draw after the fact. The envoy was a mid-ranking wolf named Corson, who had clearly been given a very careful speech. He delivered the speech in the formal receiving room. It was a speech about pack protocol and the correct handling of affiliation releases in cases of spousal death without heirs, and it was a speech that took, by my count, approximately 4 minutes. When it was done, I said, "Ironfell's protocol is noted. It is also the last time it will be discussed in this hall. The woman you released is the Luna of Thornmere. If you find the need to revisit the question of her worth, you may find the conversation goes differently than you hope." Corson left the next morning. I have not heard from Ironfell since. The bonding ceremony was held at the New Moon, a smaller ceremony than the council had initially proposed, which Maren had requested with the same practical directness she applied to everything, pointing out that a large ceremony was primarily useful for signaling to other packs, and that she did not particularly need to be signaled at. The council had looked at me. I had said I agreed with her. We had the smaller ceremony. She wore her own dress, altered by the pack seamstress, to something more fitted, but still in the same undyed linen she favored, and I stood across the stone floor from her in the candlelit hall, with the pack assembled in the gallery above, and when the Moonseer performed the binding, and the marks on our wrists flared together, the same warmth, the same silver gold, answering each other the way they had been answering each other from the beginning, I heard the pack draw one collective breath. She looked at me through the light of the bond, and her expression was the same as it had been across the kitchen table in Fernholt, steady, patient, real. The expression of someone who has thought about a thing thoroughly and arrived at the same place 3 times running, and has therefore decided to trust it. She reached up with her free hand and touched the mark on my wrist, lightly. Not a gesture of ceremony, just the gesture of a person who wants to confirm that something is real. I covered her hand with mine. The pack gallery was very still. In the months that followed, she built the infirmary into something that functioned. She hired 2 additional healers, unaffiliated women from border settlements, trained but lacking pack sponsorship, whom she tracked down through the healers' network she had maintained from Fernholt, which was more extensive than I had expected, and which she had apparently been running quietly for years, connecting healers who had no pack support with patients who had no access. She reorganized the supplies with the same attention she had given her record book in the Fernholt kitchen, and she walked the wolf runs twice a week and knew every wolf in the perimeter roster by name within 3 months, which is something that takes most new pack members considerably longer. The pack, for its part, found her. Not all at once. Packs do not give trust quickly, especially to a Luna, who arrived without familiar credentials. But she treated their injuries and listened to their questions without condescension and remembered what they told her. And the wolves, in the way of wolves, understood the difference between someone performing care and someone actually providing it. By the second season, she had the pack's respect without having asked for it, which is the only way pack respect is worth having. I watched all of this and understood, slowly, that the thing I had been looking for on those cold roads had been something I could not have described accurately before I found it. Not a particular quality or a trait or even a kind of kindness. Something simpler than that. Someone who was, in the bones of them, exactly what they appeared to be. No performance, no calculation, no version of themselves assembled for the sake of the person watching. Someone who had opened a door for a cold stranger and then kept opening the same door to every cold or injured or struggling thing that arrived, not as a policy, but as a nature. Once a year, in the deep of the winter, I take a horse alone and ride the northern road to the border reaches, not to test anyone, not to look for anything I haven't already found. I stop at the way station at Crestholm where Orvin still works, and I eat whatever he has in the pot, and I sit by the fire for an evening, the way a man sits when he has somewhere important to return to, and is taking a moment, just a moment, to remember what it felt like before he did. Then I ride home. The road east into Fernholt is passable year-round now. I had it cleared and maintained 2 winters ago, which the settlement has found useful, and which Marin noted, when I mentioned it, she had not asked for. No, I said, but Fernholt keeps 3 of my best healer contacts warm and fed and within reach. It seemed practical. She had given me that quality around her eyes that was her version of a smile, and she had not said that she understood exactly what I had done and why, but she had squeezed my hand once, briefly, which is the way she says things she has decided do not need to be said aloud. I know this by now. I know the difference between her silence that means she is thinking, and her silence that means she has already thought and arrived, and is simply present in the arrival. I know how she takes her tea, and the order she checks her shelves in the morning, and the sound she makes when she is reading something in the record book that surprises or pleases her. I know that she sleeps with her left wrist near her heart, and that the mark there is always warm, always lit, always answering mine. I had left Thornmere looking for a door that opened without conditions. I had found a woman who opened it, and then built, in the time since, a life in which every door she tended was kept a little more open than it had been before. Not for me, not for any king, but for the cold and the injured, and the overlooked, and the unaffiliated. And if that is not a Luna, then the word has never been used correctly. Every year, when I ride back from Crestholm and come through the gate of Thornmere and see the light in the infirmary window and know she is there, finishing something, writing something down in that careful hand, tending some small injured thing, I am still, in some undeniable part of myself, the cold man in the mended cloak, standing at a door in a snowstorm. And she is still the woman who opened it.